Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub. And what's the most important and universally known word in the Yiddish language, which conveys the transcending Jewish value? Think for a moment. What Yiddish word comes to mind? The most important, universally known word in the Yiddish language, which conveys the transcending value of the Jewish tradition, encapsulates what the Jewish tradition is all about. What is it? Oh, you all know it. It's the word Mensch. It's the quintessential Yiddish word that says everything one needs to know about being a Jew and being a responsible, lovely human being. When someone calls you a Mensch, there's no higher accolade in the Jewish lexicon. It's what we all want of our children, our sons and our daughters. We want them to be a Mensch. It's what we hope to be ourselves in our dealings with those with whom we share our life, our families, our friends, our community. Those whom we like and love, and those whom we don't. The late Joseph Heller, alav shalom, the great Jewish author who wrote Catch-22, once defined the word Mensch for me on L'Chaim. He said, a Mensch is someone who takes responsibility for helping others and does what's right because it's right, not for any ulterior reason. Well, on this edition of L'Chaim, it's my great honor to introduce you to a Mensch, Rabbi Joshuah Hammerman, one of the most highly respected congregational rabbis in America, who served the conservative movement's Temple Bethel in Stamford, Connecticut since 1992. And among the many things Josh does to contribute to the Jewish world, he serves on the Select Rabbinic Leadership Council of JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, and is a member of the faculty of Klal, the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership. Josh is also an award-winning writer and journalist whose column, On One Foot, can be read in the New York Jewish Week and online worldwide. And in 2009, Josh was awarded the prestigious Simon Rockower Award, the American Jewish community's highest journalistic award. Josh is also the author of TheLordIsMyShepherd.com, Seeking God in Cyberspace, and is the co-author of a children's book entitled, I Have Some Questions About God. And as we sit together on this edition of L'Chaim, Josh has written a wonderful, courageously honest book that presents the myriad challenges that confront the congregational rabbi, describing the inner conflicts and fears and challenges and choices and moments of enormous joy and satisfaction, which are, for many practicing rabbis, their day-to-day world. The book is entitled Mensch Marks, Life Lessons of a Human Rabbi. And it offers a fascinating and thought-provoking reflection on life from a Jewish perspective. And in full journalistic disclosure, I have a long history with Josh. We are both rabbis in Stamford, Connecticut. I've been a huge fan of Josh Hammerman. It's his first days as assistant rabbi in Stamford, and I was thrilled to be at his installation at Temple Bethel. Mazal Tov, my friend. Fabulous job, and it is wonderful to have you sitting again at this table. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. It's so wonderful to be here.
Thank you. There's so many questions I have to ask you about.
I'm sure.
About my Mensch Marks.
You know, lived through some of these things.
I did, and but you write about them so beautifully. But this is a beautifully written book. It's an easy read, but once you start it, and it's made up of very short chapters. It's almost like, again, I'm reading a letter you've written to yourself for You've written for, as you went through life, you were constantly reflecting, and then you gathered them all together and put them in Mensch Marks.
Right.
But it's a lovely, wonderful read. So
thank you.
Thank you for that as well. Look, almost every rabbi is asked from time to time, so why'd you become a rabbi? And the question is, I always feel, has motives that are layers upon layers. But I want to know why you ultimately chose to be a rabbi, and what was your upbringing like, and what influenced you. But you write in Mensch Marks that becoming a rabbi for you at one point was a nightmare. Your father was a cantor, and you watched some of the way he was treated by congregants and by life and the demands put on him. And at one point you said to yourself, I will never become a rabbi cantor. And yet you chose to do so. I want to know the evolution of that thinking. Tell us a little bit about your background, and then why did you choose to go against your nightmare?
Well, in a sense, the book is the unfolding of that decision.
Yes.
And although the essays take place over 30-plus years.
But wait, they take place after you're a rabbi.
Most of them, just about all of them do.
Yes.
But they're not in chronological order. They're more in thematic order.
Correct.
Because there are certain themes that I've carried through since the beginning of my career. But they do, as we get toward the end, begin to explain just why, in the end, I made that decision to become a rabbi, and how important that decision was for me and for so many, God knows, thousands of people whom I've had the good fortune of connecting with over the course of my career.
And touching. And you've influenced so many lives, Josh.
Well, and the weight of that and the great honor of that comes through, I think, in the essays, but certainly has come through in my career. And
by the way, I should say, I would love every rabbi to feel what you just felt. They don't all, but you do. Kol hakavod to you. I want to know how you got past the nightmare.
Well, getting back to my history, I grew up in Brookline, Massachusetts. My father was the dean of New England Cantors in Brookline at Kehilloth Israel.
What was his name?
His name was Michael Hammerman. And
a nice man?
He was a wonderful man. He was a mensch. And so he would constantly be telling me, be a mensch, be a mensch, be a mensch. It was his only wish for me, really, although I think he also had a wish that I become a rabbi. Maybe that's partly because he was a cantor and he had to deal with rabbis all the time, and he didn't want me to become a cantor.
But the refrain, be a mensch, was something you grew up with.
I grew up with it. And I grew up with it, and it was so powerful, and I went from Brown University, where I studied religion, sort of coming through the back door back to Judaism, went to the Jewish Theological Seminary, and my father passed away my first year as a rabbinical student.
How?
So that became...
How did he pass away?
He had a heart attack. He had been ill, but...
How old?
He was 60. He was
relatively
60.
Young in this world.
Extremely young. Extremely young. He had, he had the chutzpah to go and die on me at a moment when I was really trying to resolve my relationship with him. And
what was your relationship with him?
It was
complicated, easy, what?
It was fairly easy because I'm a middle child, so I'm always making things fairly easy. And I achieved, and I was a male, I was a boy. Back in those days, you could achieve in a religious community and a conservative community.
You grew up in a traditional conservative household.
Very traditional conservative congregation as well. And I achieved, and I went to an Ivy League university, and so I didn't have a complicated relationship with him in the sense of his being disappointed in me. But I always knew that there was much more of him for me to get to know. I was just a kid. I was 21 when he died. So that was the unresolved aspect of it. And it sort of froze me in place because you just don't make major decisions. I was probably ready to jump ship to the reform movement at that point. I was disappointed in some of the things at JTS. I may have left the rabbinate altogether. So I had a lot of ambiguity, a lot of ambivalence about it. But then stuck it out, and I also went to journalism school at the same time,
Where?
NYU, in downtown. So rabbi by day, journalist by night. By day, I was.
You loved writing.
And always, and that was my goal, really, to be a writer. I started, in the ivory tower studying Talmud, and then at night I would cover night court and go to Rikers Island and see real life. And that
Real life.
Yeah, that fed my understanding that to be a religious leader, to be a Jew, to be a rabbi, really means to be a human being, and not to deal in the ivory tower world of books as much as to deal in the real life situations of real people. So that became my calling card as a rabbi from the start, to be human, to be fully human. And I started out in the pulpit not really knowing whether that's where I would end up.
Okay, but I'm going to push you.
Uh-huh.
You jumped something.
I jumped something.
I want to know, was it a conscious, you write
Yeah,
about the nightmare.
right.
And you say it was your nightmare to become a rabbi. It sounded when you wrote it like the last thing Josh Hammerman would ever do is to become a rabbi.
Yeah.
Something changed, Josh. I want to know why.
The rabbinate changed me.
But did you become a rabbi before you decided to become a rabbi?
I think everyone...
You decided to go to JTS.
Yes.
The Conservative Movement's Rabbinical School.
Going to school doesn't mean actually realizing this is what you're going to be.
You went to JTS not to be a rabbi?
There are lots of kinds of rabbis. There are writing rabbis, there are organizational rabbis, there are pulpit rabbis.
Was the nightmare...
I didn't go there to become a pulpit rabbi.
Okay, it was a congregational rabbi that was the nightmare.
Right.
It didn't bother you to become a rabbi, but you could not see yourself as a congregational rabbi.
Yeah, I didn't imagine that.
And when did that change?
When I became one. And it was partly out of necessity, partly very practical. The potential for income, the jobs available were just much greater on that side than in journalism, where I would have started covering fires in Podunk and maybe worked my way up to Walter Cronkite's seat at some point, but I had no dreams of that really happening. And in other aspects of the rabbinate, pay wasn't as good. What you end up doing when you go to a community is you start to get enmeshed in the lives of people. And if you can accept them where they are at and begin to feel the mutuality of human striving, if you're sort of down in the mud with them, as opposed to the shepherd image pulling them along, it can become beautiful.
You write in the book about what your goal was when you first became a rabbi, when you first...
Yeah.
And you reflect in the book about how the question that you asked yourself and then you've asked yourself over the years is, to what extent do I want to change people?
Yes.
And to what extent is the rabbi's role to change people? And you said you had an evolution of thought in that area. Talk about that for a moment.
It took a long time. There's a great quote that I use in the book from Rabbi Israel Salanter, the founder of the modern Musar movement, the morality movement, the deep Jewish values, and I really I admire what he wrote and did. And he talks about how at first I tried to change the world and I failed, and then I tried to change the city I lived in and I failed, and then I tried to change my family and I failed, and I tried to change myself and I changed the world. And I think that became my model, that I was going to try to stretch myself spiritually, morally, in all ways, including in understanding that I'll fail from time to time, but in lending that example to help others to appreciate some of the intricacies of Judaism, but also to fully flourish as human beings.
Okay, but you learned that over time.
I learned it over... All right, so you want that example. I started out as the assistant rabbi in Stamford, as you know, in actually 1987. 92 is when I became the senior rabbi. But I had 5 years of training, but I did get to give the occasional high holiday sermon. And so by the time I became the senior rabbi, people sort of assumed, I was the sort of nebbishy guy who stood around and said Mazel Tov for 5 years, and occasionally said some cute things and wrote some nice things. but God forbid I should ever be controversial or, set a standard that might be a little higher.
And I want to point out to people, because you're always going to speak about a very powerful chapter, letter, reflection, which you entitled Gentleman's Agreement.
Yes.
And take one moment and then continue, but it was so interesting to me to hear. I've never seen any rabbi write it this way. When you write about the Gentleman's Agreement, what is that you're referring to?
The famous movie with Gregory Peck.
Yes.
From the late 40s. We really talked about the area that we've come to know so well. Fairfield County is a fascinating area where the anti-Semitism that existed there was unlike probably anywhere else in the country, because it was fueled by the aristocracy, not so much by the grassroots or ethnic tribal issues. And it was all about these Jews trying to find their way in a waspy world, and there was world no more waspy than there. So the Gentleman's Agreement from the film and the book really is all about just how far Jews could, how much they could accomplish, but essentially they would not be able to feel like insiders, to fully be accepted by that society. So that was the community that, although much, much later, its remnants were still there.
Okay. When I read it, and maybe I'm conflating something that's in the book, one of the discussions you make is the congregation made a deal with you, an unspoken deal.
Right.
You wouldn't say certain things, and they would give you certain things.
Yes.
That was the agreement, the unspoken agreement. And
yeah, what I was giving was the background
yes,
to
okay.
the term Gentleman's Agreement.
Right.
But there is a connection in that there was a latent insecurity that I think a lot of people have. It wasn't just about Fairfield County at the time. But when you've made it, when you've achieved, when you are at the top of everything, you wonder if you really deserve to be there, and you wonder who's trying to knock you off that pedestal. So I coming into a very affluent community, and a prestigious one with wonderful people, very successful people, sort of the deal was, you get to be part of this, meaning me, the rabbi. I get to go, we had helicopters taking off from morning minyan to take people to work, lots of black tie gala things that I got to go to, and a pretty decent salary, and got to live with lots of pretty houses nearby. But don't upset it.
And you enjoyed it all.
And of course, yes.
But don't
expect anything better of anyone. Don't try to change people. Basically, let's celebrate who we are, where we are, and that should be enough.
Okay. In your mind, is it a rabbi's mission to change people?
No.
So when you write about the Gentleman's Agreement,
yeah. I'm probably the only rabbi who would say that, maybe other than you, because I think most rabbis do believe it's their mission to change.
There's an arrogance that's inappropriate, and you understand that, and you write about it.
But it gets back to that line by Solanter.
Yes.
Change yourself.
Yes.
Set that example. Set that bar so high. Don't complain about hypocrisy, because in most cases it's just from striving to reach an impossibly high bar. And eventually you turn around the ocean liner. It takes a long time. I've been there 30 years. And I love the community tremendously. But I accept that there are limitations. We're not going to have 800 people every Shabbat morning at services. But the people we have love it. And of course, Shabbat service is just one small indicator of a community's Jewish involvement.
And what if somebody says to you, Josh, over time you're beaten down, and you just compromise, and you accept things when you're older. You've been in Stamford, how many years?
31 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So after 30 years with a congregation, and you stood for certain things as a young rabbi, it's not that you don't stand for them now, but there are certain things for a rabbi, at some point, they're less important. And the question is that evolution an evolution of wisdom, or is it an evolution of just being beaten down and saying, you know what, okay, there's nothing I can do about it. To what extent is it compromise? To what extent is it wisdom?
I think wisdom born of realism. If I get to the point where I feel that beaten down, or anyone does, that's the time to step aside.
Absolutely. By the way, I want to make sure you're in no way beaten down. But what I do want you to speak to is the extent to which you've seen this in colleagues. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Rabbi Burnout at one point.
Yes.
There's a whole.
That's not the name of a rabbi, by the way.
No.
But burning out, right?
Yes. And we see it, although it's a very interesting phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And take one moment. What causes rabbis to burn out?
I think when there is such a difference between the rabbi's expectation of the kind of community he wants to be part of and the actual community he's living in, or she, I should say. And that comes often when there's an observance level difference. You know, the conservative movement often prided itself in training Orthodox rabbis to be in conservative communities with Reform congregants. That disparages all the movements equally, so I guess I could say that. But that's not healthy.
Okay, I want to come back to the original question. Because what you said was, you used the Salanter quote.
Right.
And Salanter quote, it basically says, it's not about changing other people. It's growing oneself, and one models. At the extent to which somebody might see even growth in Josh Hammerman, or something you say may attract them in a certain direction. As you look over the 30 years, to what extent do you feel you have grown, and how has that growth in some way helped your congregation? Or, by the way, I shouldn't say it that way, congregants.
Yes.
How has it helped individual congregants, do you think, to move? How have you seen them move?
The issues of status seeking and all of that, which I think were more in my mind than were in the congregation itself. It's much less apparent. I mean, you know, I've come off the bima. I sit among the congregants. Most of the time, we're not wearing ties or formally dressed on Friday nights for services. So there's definitely a softening which has happened. But I think what happens also over time is you get to know people so well. And I'm horrible with names, and I'm horrible at first impressions. It's very hard to really get to know someone. I'm just not good at being superficial. Maybe I am, but I don't think I am. But as you've gone through life cycle events with families, as you've seen them in the emergency rooms, as you've celebrated at their weddings, there's nothing that replaces that. So that every time you're meeting that person, it's like a family member. Mm-hmm. So if they're family members, you can be much more vulnerable. You can let down your guard. But I will say that as a general rule, being a mensch is always having to say you're sorry. And so what I've gotten better at is I'm really good at remorse and really good at self-correcting, and also understanding that there are multiple ways to understand different situations. It doesn't mean I'm any less principled, because civility on the one hand is very important in being a mensch. Being principled is also important. You have to try to balance the two so that you can communicate ideas, complex ideas, strong ideas, but in ways that you're hearing the other person.
I think you're right that rabbis make a mistake if they think their job is to make people better.
Or more Jewish.
Well, I don't know any rabbi who doesn't think that. Every rabbi would like his congregation, I think, to be more committed to Judaism, to be practicing more. The question is, how do you do that and respect the fact that congregants are just people too, and they are going to make their own decisions, and you can't dictate to them. Yeah. But I don't know any rabbi, and I don't know that that's true for you even, that you wouldn't like your congregation to be as caring about Jewish things, to be more caring about Jewish things, to be more committed to the Jewish people, whether they agree with Israeli policy or they don't agree with the policy, they understand the state of Israel is critical to their life. And in some way, they live a more Jewish life. I would be surprised if you say to me that doesn't matter to you.
Of course, identification with the Jewish people, the importance of Israel. But for the most part, Jewish rituals are really all about trying to concretize deep Jewish values. And those values usually come back to, I remember once you were explaining the essence of Judaism, sort of the on one foot. It was, be nice to each other, love each other. That's what it's all about. Keeping Shabbat is all about loving each other, treating your animals kindly. Kashrut is all about, respecting the value of life and minimizing pain. All of those things are so important, but how many people come up to you at funerals, or before the funeral, the family says, well, he wasn't a good Jew, but he was a good person. The claim of Mensch Marks, and my feeling, is that you cannot be a good person, a really good person, without, on some level, being a good Jew.
Absolutely.
That defines being a good person. They're interchangeable. Or someone who says, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. We hear that all the time.
Does that bother you? If somebody says this...
It's not true. If you are, in the sense, very spiritual, if spirituality is embedded in deep values, coming back again to morality, to musar, to love your neighbor as yourself, to seeing the human being in front of you as being someone in God's image, if that's who you are, then you're very religious.
Interesting. But are you Jewish?
If you express that religiosity through Jewish means.
Normally the
like
person
Shabbat,
who says that to you at a funeral or somewhere else is really saying, I didn't live a Jewish life. I think I was a good, honest person. And by the way, I don't know who judges who's good and honest, but let's assume they were.
Well, good and honest is, it's in Leviticus.
Yes, I understand.
The holiness code
yes, by the way, I think,
doesn't stop at ritual.
No, to the contrary, and I want people to hear what you've said. If there's a hierarchy, the first and most important thing to be, from a Jewish perspective, is a mensch.
Right.
That's the purpose of that's the genius of your book. And everybody, if everybody just would learn one thing that you're trying to teach, what you're trying to teach is to be a good Jew, it starts with being a mensch. And if you're not a mensch, the rest is all nonsense.
And it's not this cutesy Yiddish term.
That is correct.
It's like bringing your kid to be a mensch, with chutzpah and eat bagels.
It's what your father meant. It's what
the mensch on the bench is. We have to get this has to be trending.
It's what your father meant when he said to you, "Be a mensch."
Be a mensch.
Okay, he wanted you to be a responsible, lovely, loving human being.
And just like Eskimos have 50 words for snow, we can come up with 50 or more qualities that go into being a mensch.
Correct.
And there is no English term that comes close.
Correct.
To being a good person does not come close.
Yes. I'm going to say this again. You wrote a courageous book, Josh Hammerman. Okay. But I'm going to come back to this.
Yes.
And you and I have known each other a long time, so I'm not telling you something you don't know about me. I have said over and over again, I want to teach exactly what you're trying to do in your book. What it is to be a Jew begins with the most important thing in the Jewish tradition is other people. How you treat other people is paramount. Everything else is commentary. Having said that, I want a good Jew to begin by being a good mensch, but I don't want to end there. And very often, you and I now live in a Jewish world where, first of all, people are not mensches. But even if they are, would I like to see, even in myself, a greater commitment to living a Jewish lifestyle and living a Jewish committed life? And that is, you said this a moment ago.
Yeah.
That is also part of what it means to be a Jewish mensch.
Yes. But we can't lose sight of the deeper values that, now the ultimate purpose for any of the mitzvot might be God said you should do it.
That's not what you and I believe.
Right. And even if it is, I think God wants us to get deeper into it. So we need to get to these deeper values.
There are many midrash in which God says, I don't care. Just be good to everybody, you know. Take care of my children. And don't worry about. But I'm only saying, as a rabbi, that's not where I want it to end, nor do I ever want anybody to think that is my rabbin. I don't want people to come on the high holidays and hear Mark Golub and go away thinking, Mark only wants me to be a good person. But when I say want, it's not about what I want. I feel I am conveying the message of a Jewish tradition that I am just one little speck in a long chain, and the only difference between me and the congregation is not that I'm any better. I'm not any better than anybody in that room.
Right.
But they have their expertise is in what they've studied. And you know, they know things in their professional life and in their hobbies I have no knowledge of. This is my life. The only reason I have a right to speak for the Jewish tradition is that this is what I care about 24 hours a day and what I've spent a great deal of my life studying. And if they listen to me, it's not because I want them to think I'm a better person, because I'm not. And I'm not a wiser person than many of the people in that room. The one thing I can do is, though, I can bring to them a perspective of the Jewish tradition that they want to hear. Then they should do with it whatever they want. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, but I think what we have to, the fact of placing certain mitzvot at the head of the list and disregarding.
Ahead of what?
Well, you know.
Head of Menschlichkeit? Never.
Menschlichkeit, but also focus. Are you Shomer Shabbat? Are
Okay,
you
but
keeping
you and I
kosher?
agree there.
Are you praying 3 times a day?
You and I agree there. The only thing I'm
it's
not.
bad. It's bad marketing.
Okay, but I
For
don't
one
want.
thing.
I don't want anybody to think Josh Hammerman thinks whether you celebrate Shabbat or not. It doesn't matter. Does it matter?
Of course it matters, but it matters.
How much does it matter?
It matters a lot.
Okay.
And it matters on all kinds of levels. But I think if you start from the premise that being a mensch, being this deeply loving person, is the ultimate goal of being a good Jew, whatever that means, then you're going to get a lot farther with your 20s and 30s who are leaving religion in droves, and you're going to relate to people on the deepest human level where they live. And that's, you know, so for instance, the New York Times article that appears here on Oreo cookies, that sort of became a benchmark, not a benchmark, in American Jewish life back in 1997 or 8 when it was written. It was talking about how Oreos became a symbol of kashrut in so many ways, but also a symbol of acceptance into the vanilla masses, as I put, of American life. And did I really want them to be kosher as much as I wanted to eat an Oreo so much? Did I really want to be similar to everyone? Because part of being Jewish is also being on the periphery, being marginal, being able to look in from the outside and make objective assessments as to what's good and what may need to be changed in a society. So kashrut then comes to mean something a lot more than just this is where Jews eat and this is where non-Jews eat, and you can't go to that restaurant or eat with that person. It takes on a much deeper value, and that's what I'm really trying to do.
Okay, and the deeper value is?
Deeper value is deep Jewish identity reflects a commitment to Judaism, to being Jewish, for whatever reason that is, to being a little bit different, but also to respecting life and to minimizing the pain of animals and just having a little diversity and maybe an occasional knaddle in your diet. Being Jewish, you know, has all kinds of connotations.
That's lovely. You write about sacred cows. You suggest, in essence, it's part of the gentleman's agreement.
Well, it was near that chapter.
Yes,
yeah.
In which you talk about how there are certain things you think congregations don't expect a rabbi to speak about.
Right.
The way you say it is, here are 10 things you should not expect to hear on the high holiday as a theme of sermons.
Yes.
And they're a fascinating example of what they are. And by the way, I want you to hear a couple of Josh. These are, and he writes it this way. As a public service announcement, without further ado, here is Hammerman's top 10 list of certain topics you will almost never hear on the high holidays. I hear, by the way, David Letterman run a drum roll, whatever. Okay, and he writes, "Emigration to Israel," meaning Aliyah. You don't think rabbis will talk about Aliyah on the holidays, by and large.
By and large.
Okay. White-collar crime, tax evasion. What other movements offer, not our own? Fur coats.
It's a little dated.
Yeah. Words like commandment, duty, and obligation. And you even say people don't understand what the word mitzvah is. It's not preference or what.
Right. But actually, commandment probably isn't the right translation
Why
for
not?
mitzvah anyway. Because I'm not so sure that the word commandment, which comes from a feudal, slave owner to slave imagery in English, is necessarily what a mitzvah is. I don't think God is the slave owner and we're the slaves. I think it's more value opportunities.
Okay.
But you won't say commanded this.
Yeah. There is a concept in Judaism, a yoke of the kingdom of heaven. Yoke.
Right.
A yoke's on you don't like that?
No, I'm not a big
fan. Okay.
Yeah.
The Messiah. You would normally not hear people talk about the Messiah.
Yeah.
What did you mean, the Messiah? You mean rabbis getting up and saying that what?
Well, in a Chabad kind of sense, you don't hear non-Chabad rabbis talking about, bring Mashiach now, which I, by the way, think is somewhat dangerous. And I get into that in another chapter a little later on about Tim Tebow.
Yes.
But it's more about hope, actually.
Okay. Then you get to your number 3.
Uh-huh.
And I say to myself, Josh is such an interesting guy. Number 1 is why do rabbis burn out so fast, which is something you've heard me talk about. But number 3 is the fact that our religion is not better nor truer than any other world religion. When you give us your list, are you saying they should be talked about? They shouldn't be talked about? What?
Well, as I sort of go on to say, we should grapple with our taboos. It doesn't mean the rabbi should get up there on the high holidays when, in fact, I'm looking at 1,500 to 2,000 people, including many, many young adults who are looking for some guidance in understanding the basics of what Judaism is and what it's proclaiming and how it can have meaning in their lives. So I'm probably not going to say to them, by the way, the ashram you're going to, just as good. I'll want to focus on the positives about Judaism. But before the high holidays, that's when small groups in the congregation should get together and say, what are our 10 taboos? What would we not want to talk about or hear about? And discuss them. Why not? Maybe there are some good things to hear about. Maybe, especially as we talk about Israel a lot, maybe we need to hear multiple narratives. But then in the end, most of the time, our deepest beliefs will stand tall, will hold up to the scrutiny. And I think scrutiny is key. The Talmud uses it all the time, so we should be able to.
Is Judaism truer than other religions?
I think there are angles, to the truth that each religion takes. And for the most part, the deepest, most significant parts of each religion are shared. So the golden rule, love your neighbor as yourself, appears in virtually every major religion. I was a religious studies major at Brown, and that's, as I said, brought me in through the back door back to Judaism, because it was the system that I most appreciated, that I most understood. And the focus of Judaism on questioning, on grappling, on Talmudic type conversation, on finding the truth through that kind of dialogue and dialectic, that appeals to me. But I'm not saying that it necessarily is more true than other ways at approaching ultimate truths.
Do other religions have Hillel's line?
Go and study?
No, actually, the golden rule is Hillel's rule. It's not in the Torah.
Yes.
Okay? And Hillel,
what is hateful to you, do not
yes,
do to others.
Yes. That's what you mean by the golden rule, is it not?
Well, I think there are different forms of it. And I think
Yes, but
even
they
love your neighbor as yourself is still a form of it. It is different from Hillel's formulation.
Okay, but that's not normally
And
called the
Akiva's.
golden rule.
Yeah.
Okay, but do you think other religions have the notion of Hillel's wisdom and the way Hillel says it? Do you think other religions have that?
Some form of it.
By the way, it's important that people hear what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Some form of it.
Yeah,
There is a Jewish form that is unique.
there is.
And to do unto others is very different than what is hateful to you, don't do to somebody else.
Yeah, oh, there's no question that there are. As I said, it's almost like the elephant by committee. You're coming at a different angle and you're seeing a very different truth. But ultimately, you get up to the top, the view is very similar. And especially when you get to Kabbalah and mysticism, you see lots of similarities with Sufi mysticism and other forms, Eastern religions.
Look, I will give you my perspective and then you react to it.
Okay.
I think there is a universal spiritual experience that people have. And I think that out of their experience, and their response to that experience, they shape a whole religious tradition.
Right.
And that when the Jewish tradition teaches there is one God, that's what the Jewish tradition is trying to express, that human beings in general have moments when they experience the divine. In the Jewish tradition, it's called the Shekhinah. But it's not to suggest that if you're not Jewish, you don't have moments that are equally as powerful. The question is, not do you have them, but what's the consequence of them? And using Heschel, the Jewish tradition is a Jewish response to a universal moment. And Christianity is a different response to something that is universal. And Islam is a response. And so is our Eastern religions. And then the question becomes not, is one better? The question is, for me, are you more comfortable in one than the other? And do you understand how, not the experience of the divine is different, but how the response, the way a religious tradition is shaped, the values that are placed inside that response, how they do differ, and why. While one tradition can say, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, give them the left cheek. Turn the other cheek. Yeah. And the Jewish tradition says, if someone tries to strike you on the first thing, your responsibility is to stop him from striking you the first time. And you never give him this, you never turn the other cheek. It's not because there's a different experience of the divine, but that different communities have fashioned different responses. And for me, for me, the most humane, human-centric religious tradition is the Jewish tradition.
You're a rabbi. We should be, out there selling our tradition. I understand. I wrote about turning the other cheek. That's one of the last chapters, one of the last Mensch Marks in the book. I should mention that these Mensch Marks, benchmarks of Menschiness, are 42 steps that the Israelites took in the wilderness. I use that as a sort of a model. 42 stages, stops along the way, stepping stones to growth. That the Baal Shem Tov, the great founder of Hasidism, said were stages in a human being's life. So I use that as my model. But anyway, turning the other cheek came into play right after the horrible massacre in Pittsburgh late last year, or late in 2018. And when the clergy from the Charleston congregation, that was so known for having been victimized by a similar massacre, but forgiving the killer, and they forgave the killer. The clergy came up to Pittsburgh, and the question was, well, the Jewish community doesn't seem to be ready to forgive this killer, and why should we? So I explained why. I talked a little about how when you turn the other cheek, you cannot look them in the eye. And not just looking at the killer in the eye, but also looking at all of the neighbors, and including, in the case of Pittsburgh, the Muslim neighbors who reached out and were so caring, and in coming together to make a strong statement against the hate that is perpetrated and propagated by the killers. But so I've been running discussion groups on the book, sort of focus groups in my congregation, and we got into deeper conversation about, for instance, Martin Luther King and Gandhi and their nonviolence, and how that was fueled in part by the turning the other cheek idea, and how it's, as much as it seems repugnant at first to say that a Jew should turn the other cheek, we have something to learn from that. And I certainly would want to learn from some of the writings of a great like Martin Luther King Jr. So religions have a lot to teach one another. And I mean, we don't need to say who's best, but there's, and then one other thing. Judaism is neither monolithic, as you know, nor is it time-bound. It is, I'm a bit of a Mordechai Kaplanian on it. I think it's evolving. I think every generation's Judaism is a little different from the one that came before, including now, most importantly after the Holocaust and Israel. I think our Judaism is changing pretty rapidly. And so for us to say that there is a Jewish message as opposed to a Christian message or a Muslim message, every religion's experiences fuel their ideologies. It comes from the ground up, from their experiences of pain, of suffering, all the human parts of where we are.
Your congregants think that Martin Luther King and Gandhi preached turn the other cheek?
No, but they preach nonviolence.
That's not turn the other cheek.
But that's, sort of an element
No, it is not.
Okay.
Turn the other cheek is give the other cheek to be struck. That's the explicit meaning of turn the other cheek. That is not Gandhi, and that is not Martin Luther King. And your congregation, whoever said to you, we should learn from King and Gandhi to turn the other cheek, were wrong.
I'll tell them that. I've learned a lot from teaching segments of the class, because it actually is an introduction to Judaism class in disguise. As you know, I've encountered my various challenges in growth and trying to prioritize how to handle various moral dilemmas. It's helped. It's helped a lot. I've really enjoyed it. And the congregation has sort of taken this journey along with me for the last 30 years, so they might as well take this journey with this book along with me as well.
You know, you show in the book, and again, I said this in the open, it is not easy to be a thoughtful, caring rabbi. It's probably not easy to be any profession if you're not thoughtful and caring.
Right.
But, and I think most rabbis are thoughtful and caring, and there are some who are not. But you show how complicated it is. And what you're suggesting, I believe in the book, is as important as it is to be a mensch, it's important to think about what you mean by mensch and then work towards that.
Yes.
Because it can be facile. Facile is, I'd just be a nice person.
Right.
And
you can't call yourself one.
No, you can't.
You're always aspiring to be one.
Absolutely. It's what I said. The greatest accolade is if somebody else calls you a mensch.
Yeah.
But my point is, you write about this, that you have made a conscious effort to become more of what your father meant when he said to you, be a mensch.
Yes.
Okay. And I would like to believe that that's true of me, and I would like to believe it's true of rabbis in general, and that what they're trying to teach is to be, okay.
And I should, it isn't just Jews, nor, of course, it's not just males.
And by the way, a mensch is not limited to a Jew.
Right, of course. And, non-Jews can read this book. It's really,
yes.
I hope they will.
Yes. No, it's important what you just said. Mensch is a universal word.
It is.
It is not, if you're a Jew, you can be a mensch. If you're not a Jew, you can't be a mensch. To the contrary, anybody can be a mensch. It'd be nice to be a mensch and a Jew at the same time.
And just as, back to the Yiddishisms, chutzpah has now been accepted into the world as a term that you wouldn't think, oh, it's just about being Jewish or bagel. I would hope that Mensch at some point very soon will be part of our vernacular and used and trending so that people will aspire to this kind of goodness. And these are untethered times. And we don't need to get into politics. In fact, one of the things that a good Mensch should do is try to understand when to make political statements. But
and when not to?
And when not to.
Yes.
But it's clear that a lot of people are feeling very lost, and they're feeling unhinged, and the voices that are coming from the public leadership are not voices necessarily of Menschlichkeit. So that's another reason why we need to refocus on changing ourselves as a way to maybe eventually change the world.
That is lovely again, and I hope people heard what you said. You made it in the plural. This isn't an issue of one individual.
No.
There is in general in society right now crudity everywhere you look. It's very, very upsetting to me. Anyway, the point that I was trying to make was
Sorry.
No.
And I shouldn't have interrupted.
No. I love it. No.
That.
Excuse me. You're a mensch all the time, and you can interrupt me anytime.
Okay.
Okay. What I was trying to say, what I was about to say, and I wanted you to comment on is, you tried to explain to us that what it means to be a mensch is not facile and easy and simple.
Right.
It is subtle, complicated, and sophisticated. And there are so many dimensions to the possibilities, and every one of us is growing towards some kind of Menschlichkeit goal. We hope people are doing that.
Yes.
And that at times it's very hard for a rabbi who has a responsibility, and I will say it the way I feel it. The responsibility is not to my congregation. My responsibility is to a Jewish tradition of which I am a conveyor. On a personal level, I would like to think that I care about people in my life, and my congregation are people in my life who I think are extraordinarily lovely people. But my job is not to make them lovelier. My job is to help them understand the complexity of what it means to be a mensch, the complexity of it. And that can be a challenge for a rabbi. And I wanted you to speak about that. How the challenge you have is not simply to worry about that they should understand what kashrut is, but understanding what goes into the details of Menschlichkeit is your biggest challenge.
It's, I'm a professional human being. And so to be a professional human being means to be imperfect and model it. I often will tell people when I make a mistake, well, I'm doing that on purpose to show you how to make a mistake and then how to deal with it. But one case that appears in the book was particularly gut-wrenching. Again, it's not about what I preach, it's sort of how I practice. And the practice isn't about, ritual matters so much as key decisions. So my son was in the emergency room for luckily something that ended up not being so serious, although at the time we had no way of knowing. And at the exact same time, a congregant is brought in who had a major brain injury and was dying. Literally at the same moment that I came in with my son, this congregant came in with his family. I mean, he was unconscious at the time. And so 2 or 3 gurneys over, I had to sort of shuttle from one to the other because I couldn't leave my child. But how could I leave a congregant in such extreme distress, and the family most of all? So as the choice was either I am a bad father or a horrible rabbi or both. And so I chose a 4th option, which was neither, because I tried to be both, but both understood that I was reaching for the impossible, but that I was trying. And from a human level, they reached back. So the wife of this congregant came over to me at one point, poked her face in, opened the curtain, and said to my son, I just wanted to make sure you're okay. It brings such emotion. This woman, whose husband was hours from death, if that, came over to care for my kid. So it's telling me that as a rabbi, I can only do as well as she is doing, and that we're both human beings on this very deep human level. We're reaching, a very high bar of love and mutuality. That's the kind of thing that if you communicate that through the way you live, then the congregants will come along. They're not going to change because I tell them to change, but they'll understand that being a mensch is what it's all about.
Mazal Tov. Can I ask you to stay with me? We'll do another show.
Yeah.
I don't want to end.
Okay.
Okay.
You didn't get to Tebow, so how could we end?
Okay. Josh Hammerman, Rabbi of Temple Bethel in Stamford, Connecticut, and author of Mensch Marks, Life Lessons of a Human Rabbi, available in Jewish bookstores and, of course, online. He is a very special rabbi, a special human being. He's a mensch, and he's going to come back, and we're going to talk some more. I hope you've enjoyed part 1 of my discussion with Josh. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas either of us expressed here on this edition of L'chaim. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I love hearing from you. Don't forget, L'chaim is now available as a podcast. Just go to iTunes or Google Play or wherever you listen to podcasts and listen to this L'chaim conversation or ones we've put up for you already. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.